December 16th, 1944. A single phone call for words that seemed impossible. If General George S. Patton hadn't spoken them, the United States might have suffered catastrophic defeat. 20,000 American soldiers trapped, freezing, dying in the snow. The German army closing in. Every military authority declared rescue impossible. Every general except one. George S. Patton, Old Blood and Guts, earned that title through years of leading from the front, charging into combat while others stayed behind their lines. The man with pearl-handled pistols who personally led tank assaults. A man who believed war was humanity's ultimate test. A man whose fiery speeches could make seasoned soldiers weep with resolve. On this frozen December morning, he was about to make a promise that could either save an army or ruin his legacy forever. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The weather couldn't have been harsher. The odds couldn't have been longer. The crisis. Ardennes Forest, December 16th, 1944. At 5:30 a.m., hell broke loose. 250,000 German troops smashed through the weakest point of Allied lines. Hitler's desperate gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine, launched the last major German offensive of World War II. The assault was staggering. 29 divisions, 2,000 artillery pieces, 1,000 tanks. Germany had stripped every other front to focus everything on this single massive surprise attack. Their goal: split the Allied forces, seize Antwerp, force a peace negotiation. Hitler believed one decisive victory could still turn the war. Within 24 hours, alarming became critical. Within 48, catastrophic. German panzer divisions, spearheaded by elite SS units, cut through American defenses. Young American soldiers faced battle-hardened veterans from the Eastern Front. The 101st Airborne Division, America's elite paratroopers, was completely surrounded in Bastogne, Belgium. The men who jumped into Normandy on D-Day, who fought through Operation Market Garden, who earned reputations as the toughest fighters in the U.S. Army. 10,000 soldiers trapped, cut off, holding critical crossroads, along with elements of the 10th Armored Division. Tank crews without fuel, infantry without ammunition, medics without supplies, all trapped in a medieval town about to become the most fiercely contested ground in Western Europe. The winter storm made it worse. Snow and blizzards grounded Allied aircraft. No air support, no supply drops, no reconnaissance, no evacuation for the wounded. German troops advanced through snow and fog, invisible until opening fire at point-blank range. American commanders watched in horror as the German Bulge carved deeper. 40 miles in 2 days, and 50, then 60. Supply depots captured. Field hospitals overrun. Entire battalions surrounded and forced to surrender. Refugees fleeing west mixed with retreating units, creating chaos the Germans exploited ruthlessly. At Supreme Headquarters in Versailles, General Dwight D. Eisenhower studied the map. Red German arrows encircled Bastogne's blue American positions on 3 sides. Complete encirclement was imminent. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith spoke quietly. "Sir, if we don't reach them in 72 hours, they will either surrender or be annihilated. Ammunition is nearly gone. Medical supplies are critically low. The wounded are performing amputations without anesthesia." Bastogne wasn't just another town. 7 critical road junctions radiated from it, roads essential for German armored advance. Lose Bastogne, and German tanks could move freely, split the Allied armies, push to Antwerp, cut off supplies, force a negotiated peace that could leave Hitler's Germany intact. Everything the Allies fought for since D-Day, Normandy, Paris's liberation, the advance of Germany's borders, was at risk. All of it depended on one surrounded town and 10,000 desperate men. Relief seemed impossible. The offensive had thrown every plan into chaos. Units were scattered across hundreds of square miles. Supply routes broken. Commanders often didn't know where their own troops were, let alone how to organize relief. Bastogne lay 60 miles behind enemy lines, encircled by 5 fully operational German divisions. The British favored withdrawal. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery proposed retreating to stronger positions along the Meuse River. At a tense meeting with Eisenhower, he argued time was essential. Time to reorganize, evaluate strength, bring up reserves. Charging forward, he warned, would be reckless. A proper counteroffensive might require weeks, possibly months. But America didn't have weeks. The paratroopers had roughly 4 days of ammunition, if carefully rationed, 5 at best. After that, surrender or fight to the last man. Eisenhower made a defining decision. He ordered an emergency conference at Verdun, France. December 19, 1944. Every senior American commander required to attend. British officers invited but optional. The agenda, immediate counterattack. The real question, who could do the impossible? Who could reverse an army's direction, march through brutal winter, smash through German defenses, and reach Bastogne before 10,000 paratroopers ran out of bullets? Eisenhower already knew only one general in Allied command was aggressive enough, bold enough, reckless enough to even attempt it, General George S. Patton. But even Patton, could he pull this off? The next 4 days would answer in blood and snow. The challenge, Verdun Conference. The conference room in the French barracks at Verdun was bitterly cold. The heating had failed. Outside, 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, 12 generals gathered around a map table, breath fogging, coats buttoned tight. These men commanded the largest military force America had ever assembled in Europe. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of tanks, industrialized warfare on an unimaginable scale. And yet, they were losing. At 11 o'clock, December 19th, Eisenhower opened with blunt clarity, Kansas accent sharp and controlled. Gentlemen, the present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity, not disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this table. An order, not encouragement. Eisenhower understood that if his commanders thought defensively, accepted defeat as possible, the war in Europe could truly be lost. George S. Patton smiled, a real smile that briefly softened his hard features, while others appeared exhausted, grim, deeply worried. Old Blood and Guts looked energized, almost delighted. His eyes sparkled with something close to joy. This was his kind of battle. Aggressive, desperate, the kind where caution meant death and audacity meant survival. Eisenhower continued, tapping the map. A counterattack was required. Not next month, not next week, not tomorrow. Immediately, Bastogne had to be relieved before the paratroopers ran out of ammunition. He turned to Patton. George, what can Third Army do? Every eye shifted to Patton, commanding the U.S. Third Army. His forces were positioned 90 miles south of Bastogne, deeply engaged in their own offensive toward Germany. They were advancing, winning, destroying enemy units. To break off that attack, pivot 90 degrees north, reorganize an entire army, coordinate with unfamiliar units, create new supply lines through unknown terrain, attack through the worst winter in 50 years. This meant moving nearly 250,000 men, thousands of vehicles, reorganizing artillery, rebuilding communications. Every military doctrine agreed. Such a maneuver required at least 2 weeks. 3 weeks safely. 4 weeks properly. The room waited. 12 generals focused on Old Blood and Guts. Would he hesitate? Ask for time? Patton studied a map for exactly 10 seconds. His eyes followed roads from his current positions to Bastogne. He calculated distances, terrain, enemy strength. Then he looked up and spoke 4 words that would echo through military history. I stake my career. Complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop. On December 22nd, the 4th Armored Division attacks north toward Bastogne. I stake my career on it. One general, cautious, methodical, who never trusted Patton's aggressive approach, let out a nervous laugh. George, be realistic. That's 72 hours from now. You're currently engaged with 3 German divisions. You have to disengage 6th Division from active combat. Pivot them 90 degrees north. Completely reorganize your command. Coordinate 3 separate attack routes through terrain you've never fought over. In the worst weather of the war. It's impossible. Literally impossible. Patton met his gaze without hesitation, radiating absolute certainty. The planning is already done. 3 divisions initially. 3 parallel axes of advance. A simultaneous attack to fracture German defenses. 4th Armored Division straight up the center toward Bastogne. The 26th Infantry Division on the left. The 80th Infantry Division on the right. We reach Bastogne in 72 hours, break the siege, then destroy every German unit in the salient. Another commander shook his head. George, I respect your confidence, but the logistics alone are overwhelming. Moving that many troops, that many vehicles, coordinating fuel, ammunition, food, medical support. How can you possibly organize all of that in 3 days? Patton smiled, not warmly, the smile of a predator, because it's already organized. When I saw this German offensive developing 3 days ago, I knew exactly what would be required. I ordered my staff to prepare 3 contingency plans for this exact scenario. The orders are written. My division commanders already have preliminary instructions. Supply officers are already shifting fuel and ammunition. Give me the word now, and 3rd Army moves tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. The room erupted. Generals spoke over one another. Some energized, some skeptical. Others worried Patton's confidence would end in catastrophe. Eisenhower raised his hand. Silence returned immediately. George, you need to understand this. This isn't only about saving 10,000 paratroopers, though that alone would be reason enough. If you fail, if Bastogne falls, the Germans gain critical road junctions. Their offensive continues. They could reach the Meuse River, split our armies. This could become another Dunkirk. Except this time, there is no evacuation. If we lose here, we lose everything we've gained since D-Day. He paused. If you fail, those paratroopers die. All of them. 10,000 of our best soldiers. And if Bastogne falls, the entire Allied position in Europe could collapse. The Germans would gain time. Time to reorganize, possibly shift reserves from the Eastern Front. Hitler might actually succeed in driving a wedge between the Western Allies and Soviets. Patton rose from the table. At 5'11", he wasn't especially tall, but his presence filled the room. His jaw was tight. His eyes burned with intensity. Ike, I don't intend to fail. Failure isn't part of my vocabulary. I didn't come to Europe to lose battles. This is exactly what 3rd Army was created for. This is what I trained my men to do. This is what I was born to do. He tapped the map where Bastogne was marked, surrounded by red German positions. We'll smash through whatever the Germans put in front of us. We'll drive north like a spear into their flank. We'll reach Bastogne in 72 hours, and then we'll destroy every German division foolish enough to attack the United States Army. General Omar Bradley, Patton's immediate superior, spoke carefully. Their relationship had always been complicated, mutual respect tempered by frequent disagreement. George, even if you disengage cleanly, even if you reorganize and move north without being caught mid-transition, you'll still be attacking through the Ardennes in winter. Limited roads, dense forests, deep snow, ice, river crossings. And the Germans will fight with everything they have. Because they know if you reach Bastogne, their entire offensive collapses. Are you absolutely certain about this timetable? Patton stepped around the table until he stood directly before Bradley. Brad, I've fought the Germans in North Africa. I fought them in Sicily. I fought them across France. I know how they think. I know how they fight. And I know they can't stop me. Not in 72 hours. Not in 72 days. Give me the order, and I'll show you what happens when you unleash the United States 3rd Army. He turned to face the room. Gentlemen, I'll be in Bastogne for Christmas dinner. My only question is whether the 101st will have anything left to serve. Give me the order, and I'll show you what old blood and guts can do when someone finally takes off the leash. Eisenhower studied him, his most aggressive commander, a military genius whose brilliance was matched only by his talent for controversy. Then he made his decision. Do it. Execute immediately. You have full authority to disengage from your current operations and attack north. You'll coordinate with 1st Army on your left flank and with British forces as required. You'll receive priority for air support if the weather clears. Patton cut him off. Ike, I don't need coordination with the British. They move too slowly. I'll coordinate with 1st Army because I must, but my axis of advance will be independent. 3rd Army fights the way 3rd Army fights. Fast, aggressive, and without stopping until the job is done. Eisenhower nodded. He expected nothing else. Just reach Bastogne, George. Get to those paratroopers before they're forced to surrender. Patton smiled. Not the Predator's grin. Something different. Something closer to genuine feeling. Ike, those paratroopers have held off 5 German divisions for 3 days already. They're the toughest sons of bitches in this army. They don't need rescuing. They need ammunition and support so they can keep killing Germans. That's what I'm bringing them. He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back. And Ike, God better be with the Germans, because they're about to meet old blood and guts, and I don't plan on showing mercy. The door shut behind him. Patton was gone, already commanding 3rd Army in his mind, already visualizing the battlefield, already shaping an operation that would either save an army or destroy his legendary career. But could he really do it? Could any human being redirect 250,000 men 90 degrees in 72 hours? Could any army fight through winter conditions, smash prepared German defenses, reach a surrounded garrison before it was wiped out? The next 72 hours would answer those questions with bullets, blood, and frozen bodies in the snow. Patton returned to 3rd Army headquarters in Luxembourg and gave his chief of staff a single word: execute. What followed remains one of the most extraordinary maneuvers in warfare history, an operation still studied by modern military analysts with awe and disbelief. By every accepted standard, it should have been impossible, an operation only old blood and guts could have imagined and carried out. Within 6 hours, 6 divisions of the U.S. 3rd Army, more than 130,000 men, began disengaging from active combat, not retreating, which would have been dangerous enough, but disengaging while maintaining pressure on the enemy. Each division had to extract itself without giving the Germans an opening to counterattack. Units reorganized from offensive posture to movement, new orders issued, new maps distributed, new objectives assigned. Entire formations pivoted 90 degrees and began moving north through unfamiliar terrain, simultaneously in darkness, in freezing temperatures, with snow cutting visibility to mere yards. Leading the advance was the 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Hugh Joseph Gaffey. Patton's spearhead, his trusted division, the force he relied on to break any defensive line. 10,000 men, 300 Sherman tanks, 200 half-tracks, artillery engineers, support units. They rolled out at midnight on December 20th. Tank engines thundered to life in the frozen darkness. Crews who had been sleeping inside their vehicles for warmth scrambled to their stations. Tank commanders received coordinates 90 miles north, coordinates that led straight into German-held territory. Behind them followed the 26th Infantry Division, the New England-based Yankee Division, 14,000 infantrymen who had been fighting non-stop for weeks, exhausted soldiers who had earned rest. Instead, new orders to move north, attack, save the paratroopers. On the right flank came the 80th Infantry Division, the Blue Ridge Division from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, mountain men accustomed to harsh terrain and brutal weather. They would shield 3rd Army's advance from German counterattacks. In total, 133,000 men, 11,000 vehicles, 20,000 tons of supplies, all moving north simultaneously. The largest rapid operational pivot in modern military history. Yet moving troops was only part of the problem. Patton had to secure fuel for thousands of vehicles burning gasoline at staggering rates. He had to organize ammunition, millions of rounds for rifles, machine guns, mortars, artillery, food, medical supplies, spare parts, radio batteries, everything an army requires. And all of it had to happen while the Germans actively tried to stop him. Old Blood and Guts ran the operation personally. While other generals stayed in heated headquarters reviewing reports, Patton was on the roads. Riding in his Jeep, he appeared at crossroads directing traffic, at division command posts demanding faster movement, at river crossings where engineers struggled to build bridges strong enough for Sherman tanks. His pearl-handled pistols gleamed at his sides. His weathered face was set in iron determination. Soldiers who saw him that night never forgot it. Old Blood and Guts himself, driving his army north, accepting no excuses, tolerating no delays. Drive forward. Patton shouted at a halted tank column, stalled by mechanical issues. I don't care if you have to push those damn tanks with your bare hands. We move north. We reach Bastogne. No excuses. A young lieutenant, struggling to coordinate his company through darkness and falling snow, heard a voice behind him. "Lieutenant, what's the problem?" He turned and found himself facing General George S. Patton. The lieutenant stammered, "Sir, we're waiting for orders on which road to take. There's confusion about the left fork." Patton interrupted sharply. "It's longer, but the road surface is better. You'll make faster time there. Move, before I have you leading from a jeep instead of commanding from one." The lieutenant obeyed. Through the night and into December 20th, Patton was everywhere his army needed him, solving problems, making split-second decisions, pushing commanders to move faster, drive harder, accept no delays. That day, the weather worsened. Temperatures plunged below 0 Fahrenheit. Snow fell relentlessly, heavy and wet, making every road treacherous. Vehicles skidded into ditches, rescued only by tank retrievers. Tank treads froze and had to be pried free with hammers. Soldiers developed frostbite within hours. Fingers stuck to metal gun barrels. Faces mottled with white patches marking tissue damage. And still, Old Blood and Guts pressed them forward. "Keep moving," he radioed to division commanders. "The men in Bastogne are colder than you are. They're running out of ammunition while you drive. They're performing amputations without anesthesia while you complain about frozen engines. Move forward. I don't want to hear about problems. I want to hear about solutions." By December 21st, German intelligence began to grasp the scale of what was happening. Aerial reconnaissance photographed the massive movement. Radio intercepts decoded enough communications to understand. An entire U.S. Army, 6 divisions, was pivoting north, heading directly for Bastogne. A captured German officer later admitted, "When we realized Patton had turned his whole army north in 72 hours, we knew the battle was already lost. This was impossible by any military standard. No other general could have done it. Montgomery would have needed a month. Bradley at least 2 weeks. Only Patton could do this. Only Old Blood and Guts would even attempt it." The German High Command scrambled to reposition forces to block Third Army's advance. They understood the stakes. If Patton reached Bastogne, if he broke the siege, the entire German offensive would collapse. The Bulge would turn into a trap, with German units caught between Third Army from the south and Allied forces pressing from north and west. They threw everything they had to stop him. The fighting that began on December 21st was some of the fiercest of the entire Western European campaign. The 26th Infantry Division hit the German line at Arlon, southern Belgium. SS troops had fortified every building. Machine guns covered every approach. Artillery zeroed in on every road. Anti-tank guns waited to destroy any Sherman that appeared. U.S. infantry advanced through waist-deep snow. Young men from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Vermont charged open fields toward fortified positions, taking casualties with every step. Machine gun fire tore through their ranks. Artillery shells exploded around them. Mortars fell like deadly hail. They kept advancing because Old Blood and Guts had ordered it, and they did not fail. The 80th Infantry Division smashed into German positions at Merck in Luxembourg. A regiment of German paratroopers, elite veterans of Crete and the Eastern Front, defended every house, street corner, crossroads. They knew Patton was coming. They knew what it meant. They fought with desperate courage, buying time, delaying the inevitable. They fought to the last man. The 80th systematically destroyed them, house by house, room by room, and continued north. The 4th Armored Division, spearheading the advance, collided with the German 5th Parachute Division south of Bastogne. Tank battles raged in blizzard conditions. Visibility dropped to 50 yards at best. Sherman tanks fired blindly into the snow, striking Panthers and Tigers by engine roar, by sound, by muzzle flashes barely visible through the white curtain. German anti-tank guns appeared suddenly, fired once to destroy a Sherman, then vanished into the snow. American tank destroyers hunted them like predators, following muzzle flashes. Men perished in burning tanks. Crews bailed out only to freeze before reaching aid. Wounded soldiers bled out in the snow, while medics struggled to reach them. And still, the 4th Armored Division kept pushing forward. At his headquarters, Patton received hourly situation reports. Acetate overlays were laid across his map board. Red pencil lines marked German positions. Blue arrows trace American movement, measured not just in miles, but in casualties, wrecked vehicles, and the dwindling time left for the men trapped in Bastogne. Whenever the advance slowed, whenever a division reported stiff resistance or requested permission to halt and reorganize, Patton was on the radio instantly. His voice was sharp, uncompromising, intolerant of excuses. Keep attacking. Don't stop. Don't slow down. The paratroopers in Bastogne are counting every minute. Every hour we delay, more of them die. Every hour we pause, more Germans reinforce the line ahead of you. Move forward. Attack at night if you have to. Attack blind if you have to. But attack. His division commanders, seasoned veterans who had fought across North Africa, Sicily, and France, obeyed. They obeyed because they knew Old Blood and Guts was right. Because experience had taught them that Patton's relentless aggression won battles. And because they trusted him to carry them through, no matter how impossible the odds appeared. Inside Bastogne, completely unaware that Patton was racing toward them with 3 divisions, the situation deteriorated by the hour. The 101st Airborne Division, commanded by Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe, beat back relentless German assaults from every direction. Ammunition remained for perhaps one more day of intense fighting. 2 at most, if every round was rationed and some positions prepared to fight hand-to-hand. When bullets ran out, medical supplies were gone. Doctors operated with whatever instruments they could sterilize. Morphine had been exhausted days earlier. The wounded lay in freezing basements beneath shattered buildings, hoping relief would arrive before gangrene set in, before the cold simply claimed them. Food supplies were nearly depleted. Soldiers survived on quarter rations. Water came from melted snow, foul with debris and blood, but drinkable if desperation overruled caution. The cold killed as efficiently as enemy fire. Frostbite took hundreds out of the fight. Boots froze solid around feet. Fingers turned black and useless. Wounded men, unable to move, froze to death where they lay. On December 22nd, the Germans sent a formal surrender demand under a flag of truce. 4 German officers approached American lines carrying a typed message. You are surrounded, outnumbered, without hope of relief. Surrender honorably and your men will live. Refuse and you will be destroyed. The message was delivered to General McAuliffe. He read it once, looked at his staff, and replied with a single word that would become legendary. Nuts. His officers stared. Sir, what should we send as the official reply? McAuliffe looked puzzled. What's wrong with nuts? That's what I said, isn't it? They typed the response and sent it back. Nuts. The German officers were baffled. Their English wasn't good enough to grasp the meaning. An American officer explained plainly. It meant go to hell, and if the Germans attacked again, they would be killed. The Germans understood. The fighting continued that same day, December 22nd, 1944. Exactly as George S. Patton had promised 72 hours earlier, the United States Third Army launched its main assault toward Bastogne. 3 divisions, 3 separate axes of advance. Simultaneous pressure against every German defensive position between Third Army and the surrounded paratroopers. This was why they called him Old Blood and Guts. While other commanders calculated risks and asked for time, Patton attacked. Always forward, always aggressive. No delay, no excuses, no stopping until victory. The 4th Armored Division, with Patton constantly pressing Gaffey, drove straight up the center. Their objective, Bastogne, 11 miles away. 11 miles through German-held territory. 11 miles that might as well have been 1,000. Combat Command B of the 4th Armored Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams, the future commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, spearheaded the assault. Abrams was already a legend, a tank commander who led from front, whose Sherman columns had shattered more German defenses than any other unit in Third Army. If anyone could reach Bastogne, it was Abrams and his crews. They fought through the village of Chaumont, defended by German infantry supported by anti-tank guns. The combat was savage. Buildings exploded as tank shells punched through walls. American infantry followed closely, clearing house after house, killing or capturing German soldiers fighting from cellars and attics. They pushed on through Remit-Champagne, where German tanks lay dug and hull down, nearly invisible beneath the snow. American tank destroyers dueled German Panthers at 200 yards, both sides firing until one withdrew or erupted in flame. Losses were heavy. The advance continued anyway. On December 23rd, the weather finally began to clear. The storm system that had paralyzed Allied air operations for an entire week moved east. For the first time since the German offensive began, Allied air power returned to the battlefield. The sky filled with aircraft, hundreds of them. See, 47 transport planes roared over Bastogne, releasing parachutes heavy with ammunition, medical supplies, food, blankets. Below, the paratroopers watched in disbelief, then erupted in cheers as the supply canisters drifted down through the cold air. The sight alone was proof they had not been forgotten. They had not been abandoned. Fighter bombers followed. 47 Thunderbolts dove through the clearing skies, unleashing rockets and bombs that smashed German tanks, artillery batteries, and supply columns throughout the salient. What momentum the German offensive still possessed vanished. Their advance, already faltering, came to a complete standstill, and Patton's Third Army continued driving north without pause. The 4th Armored Division was 5 miles from Bastogne. 5 miles, and yet impossibly far. German resistance had hardened into sheer desperation. They understood what was at stake. If Bastogne was relieved, this battle was lost, and with it, the war itself. Germany would have nothing left to halt the Allied advance. They committed everything. Every soldier still able to fight. Every remaining tank. Every anti-tank gun, machine gun, rifle. Roads were mined. Bridges destroyed. Any cover that might shelter American troops was deliberately obliterated. The fighting on Christmas Eve was the fiercest yet. Combat Command bestruck the village of Aisne for miles from Bastogne. The Germans had transformed it into a fortress. Buildings reinforced. Fields pre-registered by artillery. A killing ground designed to stop armor cold. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams did not slow the attack. Instead, he ordered his lead company of Sherman tanks to accelerate, to charge straight through, not to stop and trade fire, not to clear methodically, to punch through enemy lines at full speed. Go fast, he radioed. Don't stop for anything. Break through to the paratroopers. The lead tank, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Boggess, surged forward at maximum speed. Its machine guns blazed. The main gun fired on the move. Obstacles were crushed beneath its tracks as it tore past German positions, unable to traverse their guns fast enough to hit a tank moving that quickly. More Shermans followed close behind, armor and infantry together, forcing their way through Assiniboines in brutal, close-quarters combat. House by house, room by room, when they emerged on the far side, the village burned behind them as the column raced toward Bastogne. At 4:45 in the afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams stood exposed in the turret of his Sherman tank. His face was blackened by powder burns and marked by frostbite. His eyes were bloodshot with exhaustion. He had been awake for 3 days straight, coordinating the advance, leading from the front, exactly as old blood and guts had taught him. Ahead, through falling snow, through smoke and drifting haze, he saw it. Buildings, the outskirts of Bastogne, and before them, American defensive positions. Helmets, weapons, the unmistakable camouflage of United States paratroopers. Tears formed and froze instantly on Abrams' face. They had done it. Against time, against weather, against the German army, against death itself. The radio crackled in his headset. This is Red Able. We have visual contact with friendly forces. Repeat, visual contact with Bastogne defenders. At 4:50 p.m. on December 26, 1944, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division made physical contact with the 101st Airborne Division. A Sherman tank rolled up beside a foxhole where a filthy, exhausted paratrooper stood gripping his rifle. The tank commander leaned out, his voice unsteady. "We're from 3rd Army. We're here to get you out." The paratrooper looked up, smiled through cracked, bleeding lips, and answered, "Get us out? Hell, we were just waiting for you so we'd have someone to share all these dead Germans with." The siege of Bastogne was broken. 10,000 surrounded paratroopers suddenly had ammunition, medical supplies, food, reinforcements, and above all, hope. 15 minutes after Abrams' tanks linked up with the 101st, the telephone rang at 3rd Army headquarters in Luxembourg. George S. Patton stood over his map board, already planning what came next. Relieving Bastogne was not the end. It was only the opening move. Now the German forces in the salient had to be destroyed. Hitler's offensive had to be crushed, turned into a catastrophe from which Germany could not recover. Patton's chief of staff answered the phone, listened, then handed it over. "Sir, it's General Eisenhower." Old blood and guts took the receiver. "Patton here." On the other end was Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, the man responsible for millions of soldiers, for coordination with Churchill and Roosevelt for victory or defeat in Western Europe. His voice was heavy with emotion. "George, I've just received word from 1st Army. Your 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne at 1,650 hours. 72 hours. Exactly as you promised." Patton allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Just one. "Ike, I told you 3rd Army would do it. I told you those paratroopers wouldn't be abandoned. But we're not finished, not even close. Now we destroy the German forces that created this bulge. Now we show them what happens when they challenge the United States of America." There was a pause on the line as Eisenhower composed himself. When he spoke again, his voice trembled slightly. "George, 4 days ago, when we met at Verdun, every expert in that room told me this couldn't be done. They called it impossible. Suicidal. They wanted weeks, maybe months, to prepare a careful, methodical counterattack. You looked at that map, looked at me, and said 4 words I will never forget." Patton paused, knowing exactly what was coming. "I stake my career," Eisenhower repeated. "For words. For words that meant he was willing to risk everything, his reputation, his command, his legacy, on a promise no other general would have dared to make. For words that saved 10,000 lives. For words that may have saved the entire war." Eisenhower's voice faltered. Those at SAF headquarters later reported tears, streaming down the Supreme Commander's face as he spoke. Tears of relief, tears for the lives saved, tears for the sheer audacity of what George S. Patton had accomplished. George S. Patton. Eisenhower continued deliberately, emphasizing his full name. You magnificent bastard. Thank you. Thank you for choosing aggression when caution would have been safer. Thank you for trusting your instincts when every expert said you were wrong. Thank you for moving heaven and earth to save those paratroopers. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Old blood and guts, the finest combat commander this Army has ever produced. For the first time in his life, Patton, the man who cultivated an image of unshakable confidence, who drove his soldiers with profane fury, who never showed weakness, paused. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, almost gentle. Ike, tell those paratroopers they fought like lions. Tell them Old Blood and Guts is proud to serve alongside them. Tell them they held when holding was impossible. They fought when surrender would have been understandable. Tell them they've proven what American soldiers are capable of. And tell them we're just getting started. Third Army isn't stopping until every German soldier who had stupidity to attack the United States has been destroyed. Late that night, December 26, Patton personally visited the front lines at Bastogne. He didn't have to. Generals weren't supposed to risk themselves at the front. But Old Blood and Guts never commanded from behind a desk when he could command from the front. He walked among the exhausted paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division, men who had held against impossible odds, endured a week of hell, seen their friends die in the snow, run out of every supply except courage, and told the German Army to go to hell and meant it. They stared at him, the legend, the general who had moved heaven and earth to reach them. Old Blood and Guts himself, a young private, face blackened with powder burns, his right hand wrapped in bloody bandages from frostbite, uniform torn and filthy, grabbed Patton's sleeve as he passed. The private's escort moved to intervene, but Patton waved them back. "Sir," the private said, his voice hoarse from 7 days of screaming orders over artillery fire, "we knew you'd come. We told each other, even when the Germans demanded surrender, that Old Blood and Guts wouldn't leave us. He'd come. We just had to hold on until he arrived. We never doubted you, sir." Patton looked at the boy, 19 maybe, already bearing a Purple Heart, a Silver Star, combat infantry badge, paratrooper wings, and a face aged a decade by a single week of combat. "Son," Patton said softly, "you didn't hold on. You won. You and these magnificent paratroopers stopped the German Army cold. You denied them the roads they needed. You disrupted their offensive. You fought with courage and determination I've never seen equaled in 30 years of service. All I did was bring you some ammunition so you could kill more Germans." The private smiled through cracked, bleeding lips. "Sir, they call you Old Blood and Guts for a reason. Our guts, your blood. We fight, you lead. Together, we're unstoppable. Together, we'll win this war." Patton never forgot those words. Years later, in his diary, he would write that standing among the paratroopers of Bastogne, hearing a wounded private express total confidence in their combined ability to achieve victory, was the proudest moment of his military career. The relief of Bastogne on December 26, 1944, changed everything about the Battle of the Bulge, and possibly the entire course of the war in Europe. Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace collapsed completely. The Bulge that threatened to sever the Allied front became a trap for the Germans. Patton's Third Army did not stop at Bastogne. They pressed north and east, crushing German units against other Allied forces advancing from the opposite direction. Brutal, freezing combat continued through January 1945, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly. The Germans were no longer attacking. They were retreating, caught in the trap they themselves had created. By January 28, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was officially over. The German army had suffered catastrophic losses: 100,000 dead, wounded, or captured, 800 tanks destroyed or abandoned, 1,000 aircraft lost, fuel and ammunition stocks exhausted. Most importantly, Germany's strategic reserve, the forces Hitler had scraped together for this offensive, was destroyed. The veteran divisions, the seasoned soldiers, the equipment that could have defended Germany itself, all gone, wasted in the snow of the Ardennes. And the world knew exactly who had turned the tide. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a man not known for easily praising American generals, stated publicly in the House of Commons, the rapid movement of General Patton's Third Army to relieve Bastogne was one of the most brilliant operations of the war. Only a commander of exceptional ability, aggressive spirit, and tactical genius could have achieved this. The United States Army can be proud of George Smith Patton. Even Joseph Stalin, dictator of the Soviet Union and skeptical of Western Allied capabilities, sent a message to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The counteroffensive at Bastogne demonstrates the fighting quality of American troops and the skill of their commanders. Please convey Soviet congratulations to General Patton. German commanders, interviewed after the war when documents were declassified, admitted their respect and fear. General Otto von Manchefeld, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, wrote in his memoirs, "We feared Patton more than any other Allied commander. Montgomery was methodical, predictable. Bradley was competent but cautious. Eisenhower was an administrator. But Patton was dangerous. He thought like we did, aggressive, fast, willing to take risks for decisive results. When we learned he'd turned his entire army 90 degrees in 72 hours to attack us, we knew our offensive had failed. No one else could have done it. Patton was unique." Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox who had faced Patton in North Africa before being forced to commit suicide by Hitler in October 1944, wrote in his diary after Tunisia, "Give me George Patton's Third Army, and I'll go through the gates of hell." That man is a warrior in the oldest sense. He understands that war is about will and aggression, not just calculations and logistics. Perhaps the most significant words came from Eisenhower himself. In his official after-action report to Combined Chiefs of Staff, he wrote, "The relief of Bastogne stands as one of the most remarkable military maneuvers in American history. That General Patton could disengage 6th Division from active combat operations, pivot 90 degrees north, reorganize his command structure, coordinate supply lines through unfamiliar territory, and attack successfully in the worst winter conditions seen in 50 years, all within 72 hours, demonstrates the highest level of professional military skill, aggressive leadership, and personal courage. The United States Army has never had more audacious, effective, or successful combat commander." Privately, to his Chief of Staff, Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower said something even more revealing. "When I needed a miracle, I called George. When every expert said it was impossible, I asked Patton if he could do it, and he delivered." Those 4 words on the phone after Bastogne was relieved. I stake my career. That is who George Smith Patton is. Total commitment, absolute confidence, unwavering courage. That is old blood and guts. That is the man who saved 10,000 lives and maybe the entire European campaign. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division never forgot. They had held Bastogne through 7 days of hell. They had fought off German attacks from every direction. They had endured cold, hunger, and wounds without adequate medical care. And they knew, everyone knew, that without Patton's impossible winter march, they would have died there, surrounded, outnumbered, out of ammunition. They would have had to choose between surrender or fighting to the last man. Old blood and guts had given them a third option, victory. Years later, veterans would tell their grandchildren about the week they held Bastogne, about the cold, the fear, and the courage, and they would always end the story the same way. And then Patton came, old blood and guts himself, with the Third Army, and we knew we'd won. The strategic impact of Bastogne rippled across Europe like an earthquake. The United States and Allied forces, shaken by the initial German surprise, rallied. The myth of German invincibility, already crumbling but not yet destroyed, died completely in the snow of the Ardennes. From December 26, 1944 onward, the Allies advanced steadily, not always smoothly, not without setbacks and casualties, but always east, always toward Germany, always toward Berlin, always toward final victory. Leading them, his pearl-handled pistols flashing in the winter sun, his profane voice roaring over radio networks, his aggressive spirit infecting every soldier under his command, was General George Smith Patton, old blood and guts, the man who had done the impossible at Bastogne. Why does the story of Bastogne matter 80 years later? Why do military historians still study this operation with awe and professional fascination? Why do veterans still speak George Smith Patton's name with reverence? Because Bastogne reveals everything about what made old blood and guts the greatest combat commander in United States history. For words, I stake my career. Not, I'll try. Not, it might be possible. Not, if conditions are favorable or with enough time. Not, given adequate resources. Just 4 words. Old blood and guts looked at an impossible situation. 250,000 men needed to pivot 90 degrees in 72 hours through winter conditions to save 10,000 surrounded paratroopers, and said, I will do this or die trying. That's leadership. That's courage. That's the aggressive spirit that won World War II. Consider what Patton actually accomplished. In 72 hours, he disengaged 6 divisions from active combat, reorganized their command structures, changed their axis of advance 90 degrees, moved them 90 miles through winter conditions, coordinated 3 simultaneous attacks against prepared German defensive positions, smashed through enemy resistance, reached Bastogne exactly when he promised. Modern military theory says this operation should have taken 2 weeks minimum, preferably 3 or 4. To do it in 72 hours violated every principle of cautious, methodical warfare. Patton didn't care about cautious or methodical. He cared about winning. He cared about saving those paratroopers. He cared about destroying the German army before they could consolidate their gains. And he succeeded. The operation is still taught at the United States Military Academy at West Point. It's studied at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. It's analyzed by NATO military planners and defense think tanks around the world. It's taught as a gold standard for rapid maneuver warfare. Everything modern military doctrine says about aggressive action, bold leadership, and decisive commitment traces back to what George Smith Patton did in December 1944. Modern generals analyze logistics. How did old blood and guts move 250,000 men 90 degrees? How did he coordinate fuel for thousands of vehicles? How did he reorganize artillery support, air coordination, and medical evacuation in 72 hours? The answer inevitably comes back to leadership. Personal, aggressive, uncompromising leadership. Patton was on the roads himself, solving problems as they arose, making instant decisions, pushing the commanders beyond what they thought was possible, refusing to accept excuses or delays. Military analysts study the combat operations. How did Third Army attack through the Ardennes in winter? How did they overcome German defensive positions that should have stopped them cold? How did they maintain momentum despite casualties, mechanical breakdowns, and freezing weather? The answer, aggressive tactics and relentless pressure. Old blood and guts taught his divisions to never stop attacking. When they hit resistance, they didn't pull back and reorganize. They attacked harder. When they took casualties, they didn't pause to regroup. They pushed forward. Patton understood something many generals forgot. Momentum is everything in combat. Lose momentum, and you lose the battle. Maintain momentum, and you can overcome any obstacle. 10,000 paratroopers owed their lives to 4 words in 72 hours of organized violence. The United States of America and her allies owed their victory in the Battle of the Bulge, and possibly the entire war in Europe, to one man's refusal to accept that any mission was impossible. That phone call to Eisenhower, those tears on the Supreme Commander's face, weren't just emotional relief. They were recognition. Recognition that George Smith Patton, old blood and guts, had just performed a military miracle. That 4 words spoken with absolute confidence had changed the course of history. Consider the alternative. What if Patton hadn't been there? What if Eisenhower had been forced to rely on cautious commanders who would have requested 2 weeks to prepare the counteroffensive? Bastogne would have fallen. 10,000 of America's best soldiers would have been killed or captured. The German offensive would have continued, possibly reaching the Meuse River. The Allied position in Europe would have been compromised. The war might have dragged on for months or years longer. How many more soldiers would have died? How many more civilians would have suffered? How much more destruction would have been inflicted on Europe? We'll never know, because George Smith Patton existed, because old blood and guts was there when he was needed most, because one general had the courage to stake his career on an impossible promise, and the skill to make that promise a reality. The legend lives on, not just in history books and military manuals, but in the spirit of aggressive action and unwavering commitment that Patton embodied. When modern military commanders face impossible situations, they still ask, what would Patton do? When soldiers need inspiration to push beyond their limits, they remember old blood and guts driving his Third Army through winter hell to save surrounded paratroopers. When leaders in any field need examples of decisive action under pressure, they study George Smith Patton. The man is gone, killed in a freak traffic accident in December 1945, just months after his greatest triumphs. But the legend endures. The spirit endures. The lesson endures. That lesson is simple. When everyone else says something is impossible, when experts calculate that success is unlikely, when conventional wisdom says to wait, prepare, and plan, that's exactly when you need a leader who looks at the situation and says, I stake my career. Watch me do the impossible. That was George Smith Patton. That was old blood and guts. That was the man who saved Bastogne, who turned the tide of the Battle of the Bulge, who embodied everything great about American military spirit. And that's why, 80 years later, we still tell his story, still study his operations, still speak his name with respect and admiration, because legends never die. They inspire new generations. They remind us what human beings can accomplish when they refuse to accept limitations. They show us that impossible is just a word, not a fact. General George Smith Patton proved that at Bastogne. 4 words, 72 hours, 10,000 lives saved, one military miracle. And that's why they called him Old Blood and Guts. If this story of old blood and guts' greatest triumph moved you, hit subscribe. We're bringing you more untold moments from General George Smith Patton, history's greatest combat commander. Drop a comment about what makes Patton legendary, and share this with anyone who needs to hear about true military genius. Thanks for watching. And remember, when everyone else saw impossible, old blood and guts saw opportunity. That's leadership. That's courage. That's a spirit that changed history.